Today's lesson is about symbiosis in fungi. We'll be talking about different symbiotic relationships that fungi have with other species. So first of all, let's make sure that we know what is symbiosis. Simply put, symbiosis is when two or more organisms of different species live on or with each other for some advantage. So it's not unusual for two organisms of the same species to live together, particularly if it's a family unit or a colony or a herd or a pack. That happens all the time. But it's a little bit more unusual for two organisms of two different species to live together. But when they do, it's usually because it confers some benefit to one of them or to both of them. So if a symbiotic relationship benefits both members, that is called mutualism. If it mutually affects them both positively, then that symbiotic relationship is called mutualism. If only one of them is benefited and the other one, there's really no appreciable effect at all, that's called commensalism. So commensalism is a symbiotic relationship in which only one of the organisms has an advantage, but neither of them are at a disadvantage. The disadvantage comes in the last kind. So when one of the creatures benefits at the expense of the other, causing it suffering or some kind of harm, then that symbiotic relationship is called parasitism. And the creature that does the benefiting is called a parasite. And generally speaking, the thing that it is benefiting off of would be called a host. So the host is suffering, the parasite is benefiting. We've talked about some fungi already that are in parasitic relationships, say with plants, even some animals. We'll get some specific examples of those right now. But first, let's talk about a good one, an example of mutualism. So neither of these is a fungus, just trying to make sure we understand what mutualism is. A clownfish and a sea anemone exist in a mutualistic symbiotic relationship. It benefits them both. It benefits the clownfish to be sheltered by the stinging polyps of the sea anemone, and it benefits the sea anemone to be cleaned out, basically, by a housekeeper, the clownfish. So that is an example of a mutualistic symbiotic relationship. A commensalist symbiotic relationship, a good example of commensalism would be barnacles on a whale. I'm not sure if you can see in this picture, but there's little like white spots on the tail of this whale. Those are actually small creatures called barnacles, and they're just hitching a ride on the whale. The whale's so enormous, it doesn't even notice them. It's not like they're irritating its skin or boring into it and drinking its blood or anything like that. They're just stuck to it like stickers. And they go wherever the whale goes, and when the whale swims through water that has food floating in it, the barnacles can reach out and grab it. So that is commensalism. The barnacles benefit, the whale is unaffected. Now we need to be just a little bit on the less happy side, because we've done mutualism, we've done commensalism, now it's time for parasitism. So a good example of a parasite would be Plasmodium in humans, which causes the disease malaria. So these are the three different kinds of symbiotic relationship, and the kingdom of fungi is no different. It will exist in symbiotic relationships with all kinds of creatures and in all kinds of arrangements. So now that we're clear on symbiotic relationships, let's see how fungi exist in them. So the first example of fungus in a symbiotic relationship that we're going to talk about is lichen. So lichen is that kind of splotchy green stuff that you see growing on the sides of trees. they are formed between a fungus and an alga. That would be the singular of fungi and the singular of algae. This is actually a combination. I shouldn't say a combination, that sounds like a hybrid. This is two different kinds of creatures living together. So the fungus is usually from the phylum Ascomycota, and the algae is usually from the phylum Chlorophyta. So these two creatures, different species, they're different kingdoms that are living in the same kind of arrangement. The algae produces food by photosynthesis. There's the green color for you. And then the fungus supports and protects the algae. So you basically have this structure that is made of fungus that algae kind of like lives in, and together they produce food and protect. That's lichen. So they reproduce by releasing a dust-like substance called soredium, and that contains spores of both the fungus and the alga. So that's how a lichen reproduces. It's maybe not even fair to refer to a lichen as a thing, because it is a pair of creatures in a symbiotic relationship. So next up is Mycorrhiza, which is also called fungus root. So nearly 80% of plants with root systems participate in this symbiotic relationship. So just about any plant you could think of that has roots, I can barely even think of plants that don't have roots. So all these plants with roots have some sort of symbiotic relationship with fungus in their roots. So what happens is the fungus will form haustoria that penetrate the cell walls of the plant's roots. So you've got this fungus that's kind of like got some hyphae that enter into the roots of the plant. Sounds like it might be bad, but actually it's really good. Check this out. So the fungus absorbs nutrients from the plant's roots. If you look back in the slide where I first told you about haustoria, it was described as being useful in a parasitic relationship in which a haustoria would enter a host's cells and draw nutrients out. Well, that's what these haustoria are doing. However, there's another side to this, because the plant is receiving minerals from the fungus that it has difficulty absorbing from the soil. So there's nutrition in soil for plants, obviously, that they need to get through their roots. But the fungi are better able to absorb those nutrients. So in the interaction where the fungus is taking food out of the roots, plants store food in their roots, and when fungus is retrieving that food for itself, through that same exchange, plants are able to get some nutrition from the soil that the fungus picks up for them. Neat, huh? So this works because mycelium, right, that's the main body of the fungus, it's longer and thinner than plant roots. So the next time you pull up like a weed or you see exposed plant roots, if you see like some kind of thin, strandy stuff coming off of those roots, you might actually be looking at fungus in a symbiotic, mutualistic relationship with it.